Hi guys, welcome back to another episode of the I Alpha Project. Today I'm joined by one of my good friends, started off as a client, but this young man, and I call him young because he's considerably younger than me and he likes to remind me, Ben. He's ex-military, he's now currently a firefighter. Welcome to the show, bud. Thank you for making the time to be with us.
Matt, look, appreciate it. It's good to sit down and have a chat. It's been a couple of years since we've seen each other face to face, just with
It
work and
has,
everything
because you're
moving
up
their
north
way.
now. You got stationed up north with the fireys, hey?
Yeah, correct. So headed up to Townsville and I've been up here for about 2 years now.
2 years, man,
And
time flies.
yeah, it's been a while. It's been, gosh, since we started training together, that was probably 3 or 4 years ago now.
Yeah, easy, easy. So how long have you been a fiery now in total for?
In Townsville, so it's coming up on 2 years. So I joined the Fireys back in February 2022, I believe it was. Yes, that would
Okay.
have been right. February 2022. And you
Wow.
do 4 months of the academy down in Brisbane, and then everyone goes to their relevant postings after that.
Yeah,
So
I remember
guys
that
might
was a
go to
stressful time as well
Gold
because
Coast,
you had
Sunny
to do all the
Coast, all the
training
way
and
up to
everything
the
else
Cape,
during the
all the
pandemic.
way
So
inland
all
to
these
Mount Isa
restrictions
and
you
all
still
that.
had to pull off.
Yeah, so we were fortunate that our training kind of fell on the tail end of the pandemic, so it didn't affect us too much.
Ah, good.
But there were recruit courses where it became a bit of an issue where if one person on the course ended up with COVID, he had to be taken off the course to not expose everyone else, and then he'd have to redo his training and things like that. So it got a little bit
Oh
messy for a
man.
while there, but we were very lucky where, yeah, we were kind of the tail end of all that, so we didn't
Ah,
have to worry
that's
too
good, man.
much.
Well, seeing as I got you on, I think the first thing we're going to do, especially for myself, but I'm sure some of my audience will get the benefit of it, the do's and don'ts when there's a fire at home. I mean, I'm literally talking to a firefighter, so I need to take this opportunity. About 2 weeks ago, I had a barbecue and I was at home and my son was helping me with the barbecue and slowly the flames got larger. Dad,
Mhm.
something's not right. This doesn't look right. We took the meat off and then we realized the fire was like extremely strong. Once it died out, we put the meat back on. But once that got going, it just got considerably worse. So we tried to squash it by closing the lid
Mhm.
and it just started expanding on the outside. So I said to myself, well, I'm going to go run in and grab a wet towel because in my head that was like the first solution. As I'm wetting the towel, I come back out. The whole flames have just engulfed the side. I threw the towel over the top, but when I went around the side, I noticed that the whole base of it was on fire and the gas tank was just there. And I was freaking out. Now, whether I did the right thing or not, I mean, the first thing I did was grab the tank, and it was
Mhm.
just so hot I burnt my hand. So I grabbed the towel, which was wet, used the towel to cover my head, pulled it out, and after strenuously, it had expanded, so it was hard to close. But once I closed the tank, my son, in the meantime, had actually gone and grabbed the hose pipe and he's brought it around and we've just watered it down. I actually started with the tank first just to try and cool that off quickly and then move on to the rest. And lucky for me that he's smart enough to think because he goes, Dad, when I was handing it to you, I wasn't sure whether to use the hard pressure or the spray one, and I decided on the spray. And I actually thought, oh, that's a good move because you're not going to push the oil and stuff. So, what did I do wrong and how could I have made that situation better?
Sure. So overall, your basic firefighting principles are sound, so that's good. So a
Okay.
barbecue fire like that is also a good relevant example to say a fire in an oven or something, which is a bit more common with a lot of people.
Okay.
Um, so first thing with something like that, so what you did correct, you closed the lid. Okay, so the first thing that you want to try and do is remove the oxygen. Okay,
Yeah.
so obviously with a barbecue, it's not going to be airtight. You're still going to have oxygen get into the fire, so it doesn't work as
Yes.
effectively. But let's say you've got a fire in an oven, just shut the door,
Shut the
plain and
door. That
simple.
should
And
be
nine times out of 10, that'll either put out the fire or kind of subdue it enough that it's then manageable.
okay.
Um, so spot on there. And then isolation of the gas is essential. So again, you did good there. You did very good in cooling the cylinder because what you want to avoid there is a levy or a boiling liquid expanding vapor explosion where
Oof.
the contents of the cylinder expand so much that it'll essentially cause it to explode. So if that's overheated or superheated, that's obviously a major risk. So cooling the cylinder first is a really, really good option.
Okay.
Um, then, like you said, because you've got all your oils and fats in the barbecue, you don't want to use a jet with your hose to try and put that out because you're just going to spread it. And especially in a kitchen, one of the biggest issues you see in kitchen fires is people might have a fire on a stovetop and they
Yep.
will try and put it out with water, and all that causes is the oil or fats which is burning essentially to spread
Yep.
That's where you see your big fireballs and things like that reach
Yeah.
up to the ceiling, which spreads the fire. So you never want to just douse it with water straight away. You want to remove oxygen, which is what you did. Isolate the source of the fuel. So with a barbecue, the source of fuel essentially is the cylinder of gas.
Yeah.
So you isolate that, and
Yeah.
then you put out or mitigate whatever's left on fire. So all that's left on fire is a limited fuel source, being the oil or the fat. That's not going to spread any further than it already has. There's no other fuel for it to burn.
It's just going to stay there.
Correct. And worst case, you could have just set it there and that would slowly burn down as long as you've isolated the gas and you've removed the gas to a safe distance so it's not going to blevy or explode, like I said.
Yeah.
So, in essence, what you did, spot on. Can't really fault it.
Man, I tell
You
you
should
what,
be a firefighter. You're taking my job from me.
No, like I was freaking out. Like I hate to say, but it's unfortunately we've had other experiences that we made more mistakes. So you learn with practice, I guess. But I
You
think
do.
when it comes
And
to
I think,
fire, it's exactly what you said. Like on the stove, like if I think about it instinctively, I see fire, and the first image is firefighters with water. So my first thought is like put water on it. So if I was on the actual stove top and the fire started, how would I put that fire out if I didn't have my extinguisher close by?
okay, so if you don't have an extinguisher or a fire blanket, and I'm a big advocate for everyone having an extinguisher or a fire blanket in their
Oh,
kitchen, you can go to
absolutely.
Bunnings
When
and
you
get them
have the
for a couple of
experience
bucks.
once,
Yep.
absolutely. Should be
You
stated.
learn that lesson very quickly, and you can
Yeah.
get them cheap and easy from Bunnings. A fire blanket or a fire
Yeah.
extinguisher is a must in the kitchen. If you don't have one of those handy, what you can do is get a wet towel, and if safe to do so, place it over the pot, for example, and that'll do the same thing essentially as a fire blanket.
Yeah.
Otherwise, if it's again safe to do so, you can remove the pot and just take it outside, for example. But you don't want to put water on it or try and douse it in that way because that'll just cause the oil and everything to expand, and that's going to cause more of an issue than it's going to solve. So,
Awesome. And I guess if
wet
you're going to
wet
use it,
towel or something.
and definitely not your wife's or girlfriend's favorite towel.
No, probably not. You want to use an old towel, or even okay. So let's say it's a pot that has a lid.
Yep.
Put the lid on.
Just put the lid on it. That's it.
Just put the lid on because you're depriving it of oxygen. The fire will go out. So a fire needs three things to burn. Essentially, the fire triangle. Okay, so you need oxygen.
Yep.
You need a fuel source. So, for example, it would be
Gas cylinder.
the gas. Yep, and you need a
Stove
source of
top.
ignition.
Yep.
And you need a source of ignition. So if you remove one of those three things, essentially the fire can't burn anyway. So even as professional firefighters, we still work off that basic principle of what are we trying to achieve? We're trying to remove one of those three factors, and that should put the fire out. We're either trying to remove the fuel source. So, for example, a while ago we had a garbage truck catch on fire driving down the road. Okay,
Jeez.
so you've got a very large fuel load in the back of that garbage truck.
Yeah.
So the driver dumps the load on the ground. Okay, and that then is something we can manage. And first thing, you want to separate the majority of unburnt material from what's burning. Okay, so you're limiting the fuel source. You're removing the fuel.
Yeah.
Okay, then what we're trying to do after that is, okay, source of ignition, we can't necessarily remove in that instance because it's already on fire, but that could be a heat source or something like that. And then it's, okay, well, we want to cool down with water and we want to remove oxygen with water as well.
So it's pretty straightforward, but it's very different when you're sitting calmly versus when you're actually having to address these flames.
For sure, and that's where practicing, I guess, fire safety and all the things we were taught back in school, and we still do school visits and things where we talk to the kids about your basics like, get down low and go, and your fire safety plans and all those kind of things are really important because, like you say, when you're heat of the moment and something's going wrong, you don't necessarily have the ability to think calmly. So you've got to kind of think about these things and plan these things before they happen, and then hopefully when it does go wrong, you can just kind of execute the plan.
Just execute the plan. So speaking of which, let's say you wake up in the middle of the night with the fire alarms or smoke alarms going off.
Mm-hmm.
People's first thing, like I know with myself, is where's that coming from? Where's the problem? Like that's my first go-to. But what would be the right pattern of events or steps that I need to execute to make sure I'm safe and my family's safe?
So you're spot on initially in the sense the alarm's gone off, it's woken you up, and then you're trying to figure out obviously, these days with detectors, is it a false alarm or is it a legitimate fire? Okay,
Yeah.
so 9 times out of 10, even in a residential setting and especially in a commercial setting. So we go to commercial alarms quite a lot. And I think it's a very low statistic. About 2% of commercial alarms are actually a legitimate activation. The majority is
Okay.
false. Not as common in houses, but still, I think we've all had heaps of times where the smoke detectors or the alarms have gone off for no reason.
Yeah.
So first thing, don't overreact. Try and figure out what's going on. Is it a fire? Is it not a fire? Okay, sometimes it'll be really obvious because you can see or smell smoke. You might be able to see a flicker of light in an area that there shouldn't be, things like that. Okay, so if you can ascertain that it's clearly a fire, then you just go about activating your escape plan, essentially.
So pretty
So for
much
yourself,
use all your senses, not just your eyesight. Listen to
correct,
crackling,
smell,
use your
you're
nose.
feeling for heat,
Yeah.
everything.
Yeah.
But obviously what kills with a fire is when you're asleep, your nose goes to sleep, essentially. So if you don't have something that wakes you up by sound, you're not going to wake up from a fire.
Wow, I didn't know that.
Yep.
I
So
didn't know
that's
that.
where people
I
get caught out.
literally thought that you could still smell. That's one thing I've always wondered. Is like, how do people not smell the smoke or stop coughing? But I didn't know that. So you don't
No,
smell
so
those.
they won't smell it, and you'll just slowly asphyxiate, basically.
Man, that's scary. So
Yeah.
once that's done, obviously call 000, get the fires
Mm-hmm.
if it's something really big, and before you address anything, make sure everyone's safe.
Correct. So get your family out, make sure everyone's in a safe place away from the fire, call 000, and then don't go back into the structure, basically, is a big thing that we preach. There's a lot of instances where people go in unnecessarily and can sustain injuries. There was a rather significant fire up here a couple of weeks ago where a man was in a structure fire and two of the neighbours went in to rescue him. Their rescue was unsuccessful, unfortunately, and they both received burns. But, power to them, they were pretty heroic in what they did and what they faced when they went into the structure to try and rescue him. But certainly, a big thing we say to the kids, don't go back in, no matter what. They're not equipped physically to deal with the
Or
situation
trained.
necessarily.
Yeah.
Correct, or trained.
Yeah.
So we'll never preach or advocate for a civilian to go into a structure. We say just don't go in. But in that particular circumstance, we certainly give praise to those two fellas for going in. They did a tremendous
Yeah,
job in trying to get that
once
guy
you
out.
understand the risk and you still want to help a fellow human being, everyone's great for that. But at the same time, we advocate personal safety at all times as well. So
Correct, because the
it's not one of
sticking
those
point is
situations.
if you go in and you become a casualty as well, then obviously that's more rescues that we've got to perform, and it can complicate the situation more than help. So it's really, it's
Yeah,
situational dependent, but in general, we just say don't go back in. If you're out,
and
don't go back in.
sometimes the risk isn't worth the benefit.
Absolutely correct. If there is not a threat to life in the structure, don't go into the structure. Even as firefighters, we'll make a analysis of the situation as to whether or not what's the likelihood of persons being in a structure, and then is life savable. So we use a term cleared by fire, where basically if let's say there's a room in a house and it's on fire, if it's so hot that in all our gear we're struggling to make entry, chances are there's nobody alive in that room. So are we going to risk our lives to make entry into that room? Probably
Okay.
not.
Yeah,
So
so pretty much just
even we're making a risk analysis, we will risk significant injury or death to save savable life.
yeah.
But we're still going to make that assessment and prioritize safety of the crews as well. So
Yeah,
it's
of
a
course.
balance that you're always
Yeah,
trying to maintain.
yeah, exactly. No, that makes perfect sense.
And I'll caveat
Now,
all this with I've only been in the job for 2 years, so I'm not an expert. There's guys who know a hell of a lot more than I do. But
mate, no, absolutely. And just to get the opportunity to ask a real firefighter, like it's like for me, I do realize I think even as a society as a whole, we learn personal safety, but I do believe that everybody should do a first aid course. And I do
oh,
believe that
100%.
everybody should do a fire assessment course so they learn how to respond to a car fire, a fire in your kitchen, a fire in your bedroom with candles. Because I think those are little events that are part of reality, but we never prepared for them. So when they happen, we react rather than be
And and you
proactive.
and you touch on an interesting point there. So there's, like I said earlier, we go to schools to teach fire safety to the kids.
Yep.
And I would say it's probably about either 40-60 or even 50-50 kids that know the number to call if there's a fire versus kids that don't. So I think there's
Oh,
these
that's
days
scary.
there's a bit of a shortfall from, and this isn't a criticism of parents by any means. It's just an observation that sometimes there's certain, I guess, fundamental skills that we're not teaching kids that we kind of took for granted being taught as children that isn't
Yeah,
necessarily getting passed on. There might be an expectation that the school systems should be teaching these things when I think the onus is still on the parents. So
absolutely.
fire safety is a big one of those. It's the old stop, drop, and roll. What number do I call if there's a fire? What's my address so I can even tell them where to come to?
Exactly.
Um, there's, I guess, basic safety things that kids need to be taught to.
Mate,
There's going to be
you hit
times where the
something on
parents
the
aren't
head.
there to help.
Even knowing their parents' phone numbers off by heart, I'm guilty of the fact that I've got everyone's number on my phone, so I
Mm-hmm.
don't recall numbers like I used to in the past.
Yep,
So with
because
my
there's just
kids,
not the
I've
need anymore.
almost they need to know my mobile number off by heart.
Yep,
I know it's
yep,
something simple, but even nowadays I find that they go, oh, even I don't know my partner's number off by heart until someone starts saying, I know the rest of it. But I
yep,
think it's something that is like so simple, but still so effective in an emergency.
for sure. Even, I mean, the only number that I still know off by heart is my parents' home phone, and luckily they still live there and have the same phone number. So,
Yeah, those still works. Mate, so before you were fiery, you were also in the army.
yeah, so I bounced around a little bit over the years. So I was born and raised down on a property near Tamworth, and when I was 18, finished up high school and joined the army. Went to the military college at Duntroon for 18 months, became an officer, and then spent a number of years in the army.
So what made you go to the army?
The army was something that I had an infatuation with or a desire to do, gosh, since I was quite young. I think I was probably 10 or 11 years old when I'd kind of made up my mind that that's something I wanted to do. I don't,
Wow.
I don't particularly know exactly why. I think, like a lot of young boys, I had a desire for adventure and excitement and things like that. And, you see films and read books and stuff, and the military tends to portray that. So I think I latched onto that at a bit of a young age. Joined the Army Cadets, spent a few years doing that, which just kind of built on that desire. And probably I think the Army Cadets was a real turning point for me in that. So I don't know if you know or not, but I was homeschooled um, up until year 10. And so obviously being homeschooled, your, I guess, social exposure can be a bit limited.
Yep.
So kind of to make some friends and get involved in an organization, I joined the Army Cadets. And I'll never forget. So I'll go on a slight tangent here. I know you're very specific in your question, but we'll explore it a
No,
little bit
no, no.
anyway,
I love to
um,
explore. I love to
because
explore.
it kind of touches into some aspects of parenting and adulthood, and I guess my perspectives on youth work and youth mentoring and stuff as well. So when I first joined the Army Cadets, I basically in the cadets you go on field training camps. So you might go up bush for a weekend and play soldier,
Yep.
basically. And I remember I went on my first camp out bush, and it was kind of the first time that I'd been put in a adverse situation. It was wet and rainy, and it was uncomfortable, and all that kind of stuff. And I remember coming home from that camp, and I didn't enjoy it one bit. Hated it.
Yep.
Um, and I was really fortunate that my mother is very blunt when she needs to be,
Yep.
and has a very rational perspective on, I guess, life and the hardship of life. And she kind of said, "Well, you know what? Maybe you should go back and do it again.
Wow.
Just because it was uncomfortable doesn't mean you shouldn't do it. Go and expose yourself to it again and see if your experience and how you feel about it changes." Um,
Wow.
and she was like, "Okay, if you do truly hate it, that's fine. You don't have to keep doing it, but don't just bail just because one experience you
Mate,
didn't enjoy."
I like it's interesting you say that was your mum too, because majority of times you see mothers tend to be protective. It's the dads that kind of force the kids to be challenged.
Mhm.
And I see that. I think that's really an issue that society has today. Is when people get uncomfortable. As parents, sometimes we can feel like, oh, we need to protect them. We need to make them comfortable and safe. But more often than not, I think we need them to prepare them to feel uncomfortable and unsafe, and how to manage that. So
Absolutely.
your
Yep.
mum telling you to go back into it and to try it again, so that you, whether you liked it or not, she didn't allow the fact that you were uncomfortable stop you from avoiding that situation.
Correct. Because I suppose as the parent, she could tell that whilst I was uncomfortable, there was no genuine danger of me getting harmed, for example. Now, obviously, as a parent, if there's legitimate danger to your child being harmed or something, remove them from that danger. You don't
Yeah,
want to
of
expose them
course,
to
of
that. But if
course.
it's it's relatively speaking a safe environment and it's just exposure to being uncomfortable or mental hardship, absolutely, that's what kids need to be exposed to. And like you said, that seems to be lacking a lot more today. And I think we're a bit of a cotton wool society where we want to wrap our kids up and coddle them, and we're diagnosing them with this, that, and the other, and we're
Yeah,
saying, oh, that's okay that you do this or behave this way because you've got this condition, and no, society should mitigate for this and allow for that. And what I think the issue with that is once you become an adult, for the most part, and I'll this sounds very blunt and harsh, and I don't necessarily mean it to sound as blunt as it does, but essentially you get to a point in an age where society doesn't give a fuck. If
I
you're
agree.
weak and you're not going to survive, then people don't want to work with you. People don't want to be on a team with you because you're not constructive, you're not having valuable input, and you're only detrimenting yourself. And I think as
100%.
parents, the damage that you can do to your child by not exposing them to discomfort and adversity, you might think you're doing them a favor in the short term, but in the long term, if you get to an older age and you haven't been exposed to discomfort or adversity and you haven't developed coping mechanisms, when you have legitimate trauma as an adult and you don't have coping mechanisms, you crumble, it ruins you.
And then you don't know even how. Then you, but for me, there's a sense of loss of identity because you can't but help feel inadequate in society.
Mm-hmm.
So the one thing I hear a lot of people is they bitch about their job because they're uncomfortable in their job, and then they want to switch jobs and they have the same problem, and they're continuously feeling uncomfortable in the world they live in, and they're not used to that feeling, and then they get labeled because it's easier to say you have HDHD or you struggle, you're slightly on the spectrum or whatever it is, and then they go, oh, that explains things, and then they just get complacent again. And the
Yep,
biggest thing
they
that
can
I think,
easily use it as an excuse.
yeah, and really that should be the reason why then, if you have these certain things and you have HDHD, then even more effort should be put into understanding your condition and navigating your personality and your life around that. But
Mm-hmm.
I said the one thing about society is we try to coddle these kids, but as we progress in society and society moves forward, what I'm finding is people don't want to work with you, but then people aren't honest enough as to the reasons they don't want to. Everything's polite because they don't want to offend anybody, but then you actually get ostracized and you don't feel productive. But no
And that's
matter
where you
what
have
you
so
do,
many.
it just
That's where
becomes
you have,
everything's uncomfortable.
yeah, and then you get so many disillusioned young people who fall in with the wrong crowd or end up doing the wrong things in life because they don't have a sense of identity, like you've said. They don't have that sense of belonging, and I think fundamentally the concept of belonging is what everyone wants. Um, and if they don't have that, that's where people act out and people join the wrong crowds. And because all they're trying to do is find a sense of belonging. And if they're not going to find that in a positive, constructive environment, then they're going to seek it out somewhere else. And that's even where you have extremist elements, like you've got, we're not going to go on too much of a tangent, but ISIS, for example, recruiting Westerners who are just people who don't have identity and are easily manipulated into being part of something.
Yep, yep, and then they get this sense of virtuosity,
Mhm.
and then it just they knuckle down and become even more vocal, but they don't even understand their belief systems or why they feel a certain way. They just know they've just been captured with it and they go along with it.
For sure.
But
And I'll caveat that again with I think the system is getting a lot better with providing legitimate pathways and opportunities for people with different conditions, if we can call it that. So people with ADHD, autism, spectrum disorder, etc. So there
yeah,
is certainly cognitive development issues or learning implications that come along with those conditions. So I'm not saying
absolutely,
that there isn't, and I'm not saying that they're fictitious. 100% believe that those things exist and they impact these people genuinely. And I think
absolutely.
society is getting better at providing legitimate pathways to help these people work through those conditions and still have a very constructive and fulfilling life. And that's what I advocate for. But I don't advocate for, little Jimmy. Oh, it's okay. He's just acting up because he's got ADHD. Don't worry about it. That's just Jimmy. That's not the solution. That's
I agree.
providing a justification for poor behavior. So For example, I can't spell to save my life. Never have been able to. Still can't even as an adult. But and I'm very grateful for it. My mother didn't, and again, good mother, didn't
Yeah,
allow
mate.
me to use that as an excuse to not perform. She just told me, well, that just means you have to try harder. If that doesn't come naturally, you've just got to work harder on that.
Yeah, you don't have to be the best. You don't have to be this overwhelming author or go and become an English professor, but you have to
No,
overcome that so that you can pave your way in society and create your own legacy.
correct, because she understood that ultimately, as I grew up, if I couldn't spell and formulate sentences and be grammatically correct and things like that, I wasn't going to achieve what I wanted out of life. I wasn't going to get into the army as an officer. I wasn't going to be literate enough to be a firefighter, which has, considering we're mostly just, a bit aggressive and foolhardy, kicking indoors and all that, there is still
Yeah,
a level of intelligence required.
well, I get that quite a bit actually, and I think that's what people like. That's why I find like people that have been in the army and even done tours and are policemen or firemen. I think it's the fact that people just see this aggressive behavior, this hero mentality, which is they just run in with blinkers on. But the reality is they're performing at a very heightened level, but in always under control, able to take orders, able to give orders, take direction, give direction. They are performing at such a high level of intensity. It's like a Formula One race car driver. You're going 100 miles an hour, but you have to be calm. You have to look at every details and at the same time understand the difference between cognitive thinking and intuitive thinking, but not allow your emotions to get the better of you in that moment.
Balance, especially when you have, I guess, a hormonal response like adrenaline or something like that, which we can't necessarily control. We've then got to have a bit of ability to be a bit existential of ourselves, I suppose, to recognize that, okay, these feelings I'm having and everything, that's just an adrenaline dump. I don't have to respond to it. I can control it. So I guess
Or you
the
can
way that I
direct
look
it.
at, yeah, correct. You can direct that adrenaline, that aggression, or whatever
To
towards the
where the
problem,
focus
and
needs
in a
to be. Yeah,
constructive way. Yeah,
yeah,
for sure.
absolutely. So, mate, so it sounds like your mum just forcing you to go back, not forcing you, but like encouraging you to say, don't let the uncomfortable stop you. To me, that's also like the seed because anyone who goes into the army, you're voluntarily putting yourself in an uncomfortable situation every day. Because I mean, that's essentially the purpose, right? To get comfortable being uncomfortable. So just your mum sending you back, like, would you say that that would be the first step in understanding that, and which is why you had such a long career and successful career in the army?
I'd certainly say so, and I think it was something at the time I didn't give any gravity or weight to, but it's something that, as you get older, you realize and you reflect back on and have a bit of a different understanding of. Even so, at the time, I was a bit of a chubby kid. I was quite quite
Yeah,
overweight,
yeah.
and I was
I can't
very
imagine that, buddy.
depressed. No, well, I've changed a bit over the years. Um, so I was quite depressed and quite down and things like that, low energy, low mood, and that. And again, there was a day where I think I was sitting at the computer, and Mum basically said, in pretty blunt terms again, but again, I'm very appreciative. Basically, you're overweight and you're unhappy, and the only person that's going to change that is you.
Yeah,
And, that's what I needed to hear at the time, in the sense no one was forcing food down my mouth, no one was forcing me to not exercise, no one was forcing me to not be constructive. And, and then what my mother did, which is a great flow on from that, is she identified a problem, she was blunt in her response to it, and then she helped give me the pathway to fix it. So she bought a treadmill and said, "Here's a treadmill. You can do it in the comfort of the house. You can be more active." As in, she identified a problem. She had the conversation with me in an honest way,
yeah,
without coddling me,
yeah,
and gave me pathways as a young person of how I can solve this. So every morning for the next 12 months, I'd get up and I'd run on the treadmill for an hour. And that
yeah.
just became this religious thing that I did. And that, kind of was the first exposure I had to doing something so religiously disciplined and then seeing such a positive outcome for myself, that it was something that I could keep applying in life. So then when I joined the military and things like that, obviously like you said, you're willingly putting yourself into an environment of discomfort and adversity. But I was in a really good position where, because of my childhood, I'd learnt that sometimes you just got to stick it out, and it might not be pleasant, it won't always be fun, but just keep pushing forward. And the outcome, there's two ways that the outcome will be. Either one, you'll achieve the outcome and you'll win, which is great, or two, at least if you fail, you know you gave it everything you got. And I think that the only time we ever fail and truly get down and hate on ourselves is if we know that we haven't done everything we could and we haven't pushed ourselves as far as we
I
could. That's when
absolutely
you
agree.
start to hate yourself.
I think every time we fail and we know we've given it our all, there comes with a sense of peace, of understanding I was at my limit. And it's shown me so much more areas that I can improve on to be better. And you're kind of
Yep.
okay with that. You're okay. But if you know you failed because you haven't completely put your all into it, and my daughter with her maths exam, she got a bad mark. She was super upset. I said, "Why are you upset?" Honest response, Dad, yes, because I didn't do as best as I could. I didn't try as hard as I could. And I was like,
There
yeah,
you go.
it's not that you can't do maths. It's not that you're not great at maths. It's not that you just don't enjoy it. So you didn't put the effort in and you got the result. The result isn't a reflection of your intellect. It's a reflection of your effort.
Yeah, yep. And
And
that's,
she took that
again,
on
though, that's a
board,
lesson you have to learn as a young person.
and take ownership of that. I'm just bad at maths. And
Hmm.
what I love about, you use the word your mum was blunt. And it sounds like she's what you hear society say, oh, they were blunt, but it's not blunt, it's honest.
Yeah,
I think
yep,
it's
yep,
it's
for sure.
it's non-judgment. She never
Hmm.
made fun of you. She was direct. This is the problem. This is the solution. It's up to you if you choose to do it or not. The problem was your attitude and the fact of taking accountability for where you were experiencing the emotions you were experiencing. And the fact that she provided a treadmill and didn't go straight to the diet, she also addressed that it was your attitude of inactivity.
Hmm.
It
Yep,
was it was it's the fact is like, no, we're not going to stop you from eating. We're going to get you living, get you walking. And I think
for
that
sure.
would have made a massive difference in your attitude as well, because it's not like, okay, it's what I'm putting in my mouth. It's like, no, it's my approach to life.
Yeah, and it's a holistic approach. And I'll also say my father had a big part of that as well. It's not just my mother. So my dad's a great dad as well. And he was a great example of someone who is just unreservedly kind and calm as well. And he was very supportive through the whole thing. And my mum and my dad always worked as a very good team. And kind of if one person was being a bit more blunt or aggressive than the other would kind of pick up the slack in the more compassionate manner, and they would
Yeah.
kind of interchange a little bit in that role. So they were, I guess, I'm very fortunate in seeing parenting in a very positive light because of that. But it's interesting. So you touch on, you know, the way that you approach something like a weight issue with a kid. So, and we'll probably go into it in a bit more detail, but I also do youth work with a organisation called Veteran Mentors. And so we work with kids between the ages of 12 and 18 who come on our 9-day camps for various reasons. It could be um, various levels of spectrum disorder, ADHD. It could be violent or aggressive behaviour. It could be behavioural issues in the home, behavioural issues at school, kids that are a bit too shy and reserved and need to start developing their character and kind of expose themselves to a bit of adversity and a bit of discomfort like we've talked about. We have kids who are committing juvenile crime. So we get all sorts of different kids. And on the last program that I did, we had one particular child who was struggling with weight issues, and it was very interesting. It was one of the first times I'd encountered this particular example where this child's perception was that her parents were trying to limit or change the foods that she had available to her, and she claimed that that was child abuse.
Okay.
And
That's interesting.
through discussions with this child, that concept of child abuse and what was child abuse and all this kind of stuff very much came from exposure to social media.
Yeah.
Now, because kids are on chat groups and chat forums and things like that, and they'll voice what's going on in their life and all this kind of stuff. And they might have people that validate this perception or
Yeah.
say, "Hey, this is what's happening to you. This is child abuse. Your parents shouldn't be depriving you of foods, and this, that,
They're
and the other. Or your
labeling it.
parents shouldn't be
Yeah.
trying to make you exercise. They can't do that. You be you. You're great
Yeah.
just the way you are, and all this kind of stuff."
Yeah.
And then also just to exposure to TikToks and all this kind of stuff, which for some reason these days, and I don't understand why, and I don't agree with it, almost glorifies issues with weight and glorifies having anything that makes you different or unique, even if it is something that is genuinely detrimental to your health and well-being.
Yep, and to society as a whole.
for sure. And
You know,
we have this point now where we've got all this great technology and all this accessibility to information, but it feels like it's being wasted by projecting incorrect or unhealthy messages to young people, and young people that are very vulnerable to these messages, I suppose. And if you're someone who is, a bit down and a bit vulnerable, and someone kind of justifies what you're saying, or kind of reinforces something that kind of justifies the way you feel or what you're doing, which is negative to yourself, people latch onto that because people want to feel good, people want an easy solution.
well, I want to share a story with you that I had with my daughter that I think it touches on what I believe is part of the issue when it comes to that. She was sharing with me about experience that she had at her work with a client, or I'd say a patron at her job, and she was running the kitchen in the cafe. And this guy was upset because he didn't have a buzzer for his food. He had to wait for it. And his interaction with her, he was quite upset and aggressive with her. And she came and started a conversation with me by telling me how amazing she handled the situation, that everyone was super proud of her. And as she started to share the story, I once she finished, I'm sure she was looking for her dad to go, "Oh, you did great. I'm proud of you." And my response was, "Actually, now that you've told me the story, I don't blame him for getting up in your face. You were
Okay.
rude and you weren't
Yep.
polite and you were arrogant, and that's not how you handled the situation." "Oh, but he stepped up to me really aggressive and he influenced the way I spoke to him." I said, "You're absolutely right. He influenced the way you spoke to him. But you're the one who allowed him to influence the way you spoke.
Yeah, for sure.
You reacted to him and you thought, I'm going to do the same. So let's reverse the roles." So the whole conversation started with him suggesting in a very abrupt manner, "You guys have buzzers, you should be using them." Which she responded, "Oh, yeah, not everyone gets buzzers if you order from them," in a long story. And my response was, "I'm so sorry, sir. I didn't realize. Did you not get a buzzer?" And her response was, because we were role playing, she didn't know how to
Mhm.
respond to that. And as I progressed, I said, "So you let your ego get in the way, and you allowed him to affect the way you spoke to him. And at the worst part, you allowed him to control the situation. Even though you defended yourself, which I'm proud of, you showed integrity in holding your ground, you could have handled that in a much calmer, non reactive way. You could have showed empathy to what he was doing. You didn't have to make yourself part of the conversation. And while we're having this discussion, she's getting uncomfortable. And the reason she's uncomfortable is because she's realizing the onus is on me.
Mhm.
He was the customer. Customer is always right. They're there for an experience. It's your job to give them an experience. If they're having a negative experience, it's your job to turn that into a positive, even if they're wrong. And if you can do that outside of work with normal human beings, you can create a better society. But the whole time she's uncomfortable. And she felt validation when everybody else that had been in a situation was proud by the way she handled it. So she's getting this feedback, and the whole time it's the negative feedback because they're reinforcing what she shouldn't be doing. Now,
Mhm.
if I take that into a weight situation where a child is uncomfortable with their weight and they're getting this validation, I think the problem is people instinctively know that they are accountable. At a subconscious root level, we know that we are this way because we've allowed it. Yes, there may be extenuating circumstances that make it harder, but we know that we're not doing everything we can and we feel uncomfortable. And the moment somebody else tells us it's not your fault, it's your condition, your parents are abusing you, that's child abuse, you do you, you're perfect the way you are, it gives us the opportunity to escape that uncomfortable feeling by taking the accountability away from ourselves. So the simple fact goes back to what you were talking about being uncomfortable. And I said to my daughter at the end, I was like, "Sweetie, I know I'm a hard person to talk to because I'm so challenging in the way that you see, and you come to me for stuff and you end up getting challenged. But
Mhm.
I so admire the fact that she's able to get frustrated, look at herself, but at the end of the day, she can then say, you know what, Dad, you're right. I could have handled that situation better, not only for him, but for myself. Because
And
she's acknowledged."
what you're doing, which I think is invaluable as a parent, is you're confronting her with those concepts and making her think in a safe environment and an environment where there can be robust discussion back and forth to develop those things. So this is where I think parents play a crucial role is if you can have those conversations with your kid and do it in a safe environment, that's allowing them to learn and grow outside of, regular society where, if you're trying to kind of experiment with ideas or different ways to deal with problems or challenges, it can have genuinely a dangerous or negative impact. So the environment you're fostering for your kids, and I think you need to give yourself a pat on the back, is, to me, that's invaluable that you're presenting them that safe environment to even have that conversation.
But a lot of times I do feel judged because a lot of people will say to me, "You're too hard on them. They're not ready to deal with that." They're not, and I'm like, "No, that was her experience. She dealt with it, and
Yeah.
unfortunately, she got the wrong reinforcement." And the way I see it, and I said this to my son, is like two things are going to happen. One day you're going to have an acceptance speech for this amazing award that you got, whether you're the world's best neurosurgeon or the best dog trainer, whatever it is.
Yep.
And on your speech, you might say, my dad was not supportive. He congratulated everything that I did. He never really pushed me to do anything, never really pushed me to fail or deal with that. I didn't find that my dad believed I could achieve great things, so I went out and did them on my own. Or you're going to say, man, my dad was so hard. He always pushed me. Nothing was ever good enough. He always expected more. And this is why I got here. At the end of the day, you're going to create your own story. But I
Mm-hmm.
won't be the person supporting you. I'm here to support you for what's best for you. And I'm not here telling you that what you did was wrong or right. I'm here supporting you, telling you that you can be better. What you did was great, but you can be better. And I think it's, yes, absolutely. You love yourself the way you are, good and bad. But know that you can be better. And know that I will support you in that journey. And the same rule applies to us as parents. We don't know all the answers. We don't have all the answers. But if we're open to the fact that we need support and we need to do what's best for that child, not because we have to teach them to take care of themselves, not necessarily that we're going to take care of them, and know that we're going to make mistakes. And along the way, look at every situation and don't say, it's my child who could have been better. They weren't listening to me. They weren't responsive. Nothing I say goes into their heads. Then that's my job to go, okay, well, I've done the best I could, but there must be a better way.
And I think it's
And being
okay if there
open
is a
to
better
that.
way at times.
Yeah, well, I would argue that every single time there's a better way.
For sure, there's no perfect solution or perfect outcome to any problem. There's always ways we could improve, and there's ways we could have done worse in a situation. It's about having that ability to have that self perspective to kind of, and it sounds like you do this quite often, is after having a situation, reflecting on how you dealt with it, how you approached it, and then how you can develop and improve on that in the future. Because there's always takeaways. So in the military, we used a kind of an AAR or a debrief process: fix, sustain, improve. So let's say you had a mission. Okay, what was utterly broken in that mission? I.e., what do we need to fix?
Yeah.
Okay, it's just not right. We can change the plan altogether. Okay, then what do we sustain or maintain? So what was good and what should we try and replicate next time? And then improve. So what was kind of worked, but we can refine that. And that's and that's something I've kind of taken from my time in the military, and I try to apply in a lot of different situations. Is that fix, sustain, improve? Is it's a method to easily reflect on an experience, find positive takeaways, because there's positive takeaways in everything, even if it's complete mission failure. There's stuff to take away from that and learning experiences. There's always things that can be done better, and there's always probably things that we should change altogether. So even as a parent, having that ability to reflect on those experiences you're having with your daughter and build on those is also helping her, because if you can have that self perspective and be honest with yourself, then I think children naturally see and absorb that through osmosis, and it encourages them to do the same for themselves.
And pretty much goes right back to what your mother did for you was getting you comfortable being uncomfortable, getting uncomfortable, having these uncomfortable conversations and being okay with it.
For
And
sure.
I think that so and so because I like you said, I was going to touch on the fact that you've been in the military, you've done that, but then on the side hustle, you actually got these youth camps. And the question I was going to ask is exactly that: what would be the one common characteristic that you see amongst the youth of today, that regardless of their behavioral issues or emotional concerns, what is the one common denominator that you can see in every single one that they either might have or are lacking?
So, as in negative common denominators resulting in why
Or,
they're
yeah,
on the
yeah,
program.
that results in this behavioral issues.
So, I guess, and it's probably becoming more and more well known, so I'm not rewriting the wheel by any means. I think exposure to social media and society becoming too soft. Um, the ability to access technology and instant gratification and exposure to negative material and negative content online, and the endorphins and stuff that you can get from that. It's the flow on effect for a young person's development is massive. I read a study the other day which linked, and it's becoming more of I guess, a commonly accepted theory, is the similarities between autism and overexposure to social media and technology as far as the impact it has on a young person's development of the brain and their cognitive ability. They're quite like concerningly similar. So you're seeing kids who do not have are not on the spectrum, but are presenting with similar attributes or traits because of exposure to technology and social media, and that coupled with this kind of soft coddling approach to society where everyone is valued and everyone can be heard and your opinion is just as valuable as everyone else's and all this kind of stuff, it's it leads to people being weak and entitled, and then that leads to negative behaviors.
Yeah, because you actually haven't done anything worthwhile to substantiate your opinion in the first place. And then sometimes
Correct.
people that do have a valuable opinion, and they just get discarded because someone says, well, you don't have a qualification regardless of the fact that you've had years of experience.
Correct. And
And that,
society has reached this strange tipping point where if you're a minority and it's the flavor of the month, you can spruik your opinion without actually validating or justifying it with a robust argument. And I don't know why society's gotten to that point. Um, but the idea that you can just say something that everyone else should accept it as fact without even justifying what you're saying is nonsensical to me.
well, I like you, James, podcast that I did with James, the character through martial arts. He also touched on social media, and my viewpoint with social media was I do understand the risks involved with it, but it is a tool.
Mm-hmm.
And it's
Yes.
like a hammer that I use the analogy. You can build something with a hammer or you can destroy something with a hammer.
Mm-hmm.
So I think at the end of the day, social media is a tool, but it's also a tool that is now being used by parents to negate their role that they have, that I believe their responsibility. Nowadays, if you want to distract a child, you give them an iPad or a phone. And I think from a young, early age now, and I can understand the temptation to do that. And I'm just as guilty of back then putting my son in front of the TV with a DVD.
Mm-hmm.
But at the same time, I'm very selective about what he can watch.
Yep.
But I was also very aware of the fact that no, I'm not using him social media or TV or any sort of media as a distraction. I want to use it momentarily while I do something before I can give him more attention. So I think
For
a lot
sure.
of
Yep.
times parents then take away, they go, okay, watch that. And it gives them the freedom to do something else. So when their child reacts to them, they want to be supportive, but they don't realize that being supportive by just blindly agreeing so they can feel safe and understood and supported, it's being supporting them is actually arguing, discussing things back to them. So one thing I do with my kids is I'll send them videos on social media that talk about life, the economy, the gender issues, finance issues, going digital, or from both sides of the spectrum. And a lot of times we'll discuss it. And on times they'll send me funny videos that there's a sense of humor and they're great. But then there's
Mm-hmm.
also a lot of stuff that I'll openly voice them. I say, guys, are you watching that? What did you get for your 2 seconds? What did you get for your 10 minutes watching that video? Like they'll watch YouTubers do just talking in everyday life, like watching people live their day. And I was like, what substance are you getting? Are they having interesting conversations? And I challenge them on these things, and then I know they'll walk away going, "Yeah, that was entertaining, but I never got anything from it." So I
And I
think
think it's
it's up to the parents' responsibility to also teach kids that this is a tool and how can you use this tool to benefit yourself. Because without this, we wouldn't be having this podcast.
For sure.
We
And
wouldn't be
and
sharing this
it's
type of
it's a
information.
it's a difficult trap even as adults. Like even myself, if I'm having a quiet time at work or something, it's really hard to not just jump on and watch a couple of funny videos and get that bit of a laugh and things like that. And
Yep.
I think
Yep.
even as adults, you have to pull yourself away from that instant little endorphin hit and go,
Yes, I
okay, what's
agree.
something actually more constructive that I can do with my time? And kind of, like you say, developing and teaching that to your kids is really important because at a younger age, and I'm not trying to, bash on kids or say that kids don't know and they're young and dumb and all of this. Kids are very smart. Kids are very intellectual these days,
Absorb so much
sometimes to their own
information.
detriment. Um,
Yeah.
and but if they don't necessarily understand cause and effect in the same way, and even as a 31-year-old adult male, I don't always see or understand cause and effect until it's too late. I think that's something we all
Yep.
go through.
Yep.
Um, it's important as parents that we use our perspective and time that we've already had and experiences to kind of impart a bit of that perspective. And like you're saying, hey, have you thought about the way you're actually absorbing this content and what's the relevance of it and how is it helping you? Or is there a better thing you can be doing with your time? It could still be on social media. It still could be in that context, but is there a more constructive way that you can be building on that?
Exactly. And I think that, and unfortunately, going back to society, people will go jump on social media because they want to be comfortable. So they want that chasing, and I think sometimes using social media to make yourself uncomfortable is a good thing. And by that I mean listen to people's opinions. They may differ from your own, but from a source that's substantiated. And I think in society, when we were talking about how people are voicing their opinions and they have no substantiation, most of the time that someone voices it from a heightened emotion, it's never factual. But if someone's presenting a viewpoint or an idea and it comes from a calm perspective that it addresses both sides and they share their opinion, then that can always open our minds. Sometimes you don't necessarily have to agree with somebody, but it allows you to understand why they have that perspective. But in social media, people are putting shit up just because it's emotional. They just want to get their emotions out, and they're not actually giving out any information.
Yeah, for sure. And I think that touches on to it was a thought I was having when you were talking about your daughter's experience at her work was experiencing an area of conflict or an interaction with someone that wasn't necessarily pleasant, the effect that kindness can have in that type of an environment where if you just present someone with a bit of kindness, it's very disarming for people because people aren't necessarily used to it or expect it in certain contexts.
Yes.
And then I think that also comes into the difference between an argument and a robust discussion, in the sense that if you're arguing with someone, it's fueled on emotion and I disagree with them and they've got to be wrong and I've got to be right, versus a robust discussion, which is about they've got a viewpoint, I've got a viewpoint. I can approach this with a level of humility and kindness and still respect what they're saying, but also still have the ability to explain my perspective. And it's not always about trying to change their mind or anything like that, but if you can calmly give them genuine reason why your perspective is correct, perhaps they'll look at something from a different perspective. And it doesn't mean they'll change their mind altogether, but it might open their eyes to a different approach. And you might get the same impact out of that interaction with them if they can approach it in a calm way with a bit of humility.
Mate, you've just literally brought it all together with that last statement, man. Like the whole thing about this podcast was, a, you put out fires, but then working with the youth groups, I know that you also put out this fire in people. You put out the fire in a lot of these young people that are trying to find their way, and then they've got this urgency, and they're responding and they're being reactive. And touching back right back before we end off, when we said about firefighters and people think that you guys are gung ho, kicking doors down, the fact is you're actually very calm, you're very collected. You approach every situation within your boundaries, but the whole thing is of the purpose for humanity. And you're able to perform in that heightened emotional state, not only emotional but physiological too, because your heart's pumping, your adrenaline's kicking in, and then you're able to discern and take the right steps for the most appropriate outcome that has the least amount of casualties, the least amount of damage, that's beneficial for everybody. And that's honestly what I believe that kids nowadays need to be learning to respond to each other when those heightened emotions and our bodies going through these changes. Whether we're going through puberty, whether women are having their cycles, whatever the case is, we have to understand our physiology, be uncomfortable, but then when we interact with people, do it with the idea of putting the fire out, not adding fuel to it. So if you're
For sure.
upset with me, approach it with kindness because I want to put the fire out, and I sure as shit don't want to give you permission to light one up in me.
And I think there's, for a young person and even adult, I think there's an importance in, I guess, understanding society and who you communicate with in different ways in that sense. As in, I feel like you're someone that if I've had a particularly bad day and I'm feeling angry or whatever, I could come up to you because of the relationship we have where I could unload, be a bit aggressive, swear, carry on, and lose my cool a little bit. And but because we already know each other on a more intellectual level, and that you can understand what that means for me in isolation, and it's not a reflection of me or my character, and then we can deal with it and talk about it. Where if I go up to a random person in the street and demonstrate those behaviors, the outcome's going to be very different. And where a lot of these kids that we work with fall into a trap is they haven't necessarily found their safe space and their area of belonging where they can have those genuine emotional interactions,
Yeah,
and they're expressing themselves in a negative way with the wrong people, be that with teachers at school, parents who they might not have developed that kind of open relationship with, police, any of these kind of people, anyone in an authoritative figure, for example, or even just people on the street. And that's where they're getting themselves into trouble. Whereas if you can start to figure out who your people are that are, I guess, a safe space for expression, and then knowing that you can have a robust discussion and kind of analyze and unpack the situation with them, versus people who you just need to keep you cool around, is something that the young kids that we work with, we try and teach them in the sense that they'll come on these programs day one, they're kicking, screaming, calling us every name under the sun, telling us to go F ourselves, they want to punch on with you, all sorts, some of these kids.
yeah,
We've had all sorts of issues. Whereas come day nine, they'll approach you and they could be the most riled up kid over an interaction they've had with another kid, and they're angry or whatever, but their ability to come up to you and have a conversation or a discussion about it while still having the same emotions inside, but the way they project them is chalk and cheese, because we
yeah,
intentionally put them in environments of discomfort and adversity. We challenge them on their behaviors and what they're doing, be that challenging them genuinely and no, you can't punch on with people. There's cause and effect and repercussion for that, or
exactly.
just challenging their ideas and
Yeah,
kind of having that argument, not even not an argument, I'll take that word back, sorry, that discussion or robust debate with them about what they're doing or what they're thinking, and then
yeah.
building on that over the 9 days. I think it's just as rewarding for us guys and girls that work on the program as it is for the kids when you see some of the really positive outcomes that we get.
And I'm a big believer in these camps. I know people have their some more pros, some more cons. Like, but me personally, I think these camps are really good, especially with people with your background as well, because I think you reflect back to them how they should be behaving in those situations. If the one reason you would come and debrief with me after a big day is because you know I'll give you a safe space to express yourself, but
Mhm,
you'll also know that I am not going to let you spiral on your story,
mhm.
and you also know that I'm going to challenge you on how you could make yourself feel better in this context. So
For
I'm
sure.
always going to bring it back to you. And I think a lot of times we get uncomfortable with that when we have to take that accountability. But once we start to experience that over the 9 days, I'm pretty sure that's the kids can they come to you, they want to punch on, they're disrespectful to you, but your ego doesn't get involved.
Mm,
You're very aware of where they are. You understand what they're saying. You don't feel insulted. You still carry this air of confidence and the fact that there's no negative emotion being reflected back onto them. So when they start to realize, like, you're not adding fuel to the fire, like you said in the beginning, switch the source off. Whereas in every day, whether it's with their parents or other people at home, they get there and they have these, they express themselves negatively, and then the parent sees it, oh, you're being disrespectful to me, and then fuels back with that energy, and you're adding fuel to the fire. So I think that that would be a big aspect in the whole 6 or 9 days. You said that they go through these changes, and would you say that that's one thing that um, once they do these camps with you guys and they go out into the real world, they don't have people that have been trained or used to being in that context that can converse with them. So when they approach people in a calm manner, trying to make themselves heard and they're not heard, is that something that they have to deal with once they've left camp, or do you find that's not an issue?
No, for sure. Like you say, you're taking these kids and we're putting them in a very controlled environment and exposing them to controlled adversity and everything like that. And then we're injecting them back into society and a lot of times back into the same environment, which might have caused the issue in the first place. And
Yeah,
that's challenging. So what we do is we also work with the parents. So we do a parent workshop and work with them as far as, kind of exposing them and teaching them what we've exposed the kids to over the 9 days and how that hopefully when they're back in the home environment, the parents can be that safe space and the way that they interact with the kids and everything can change. I guess the way that I kind of phrase it with the kids and then it's also kind of worded with the parents is I feel like in society there's definitely this aspect of ego and no one wants to kind of admit defeat and say they were wrong and all of this kind of stuff. And if you're at a point with a child where everyone's on edge, everyone's aggressive with each other, it's um, it can reach this point where no one wants to kind of back down.
yeah,
And the camps, and the way I word it to the kids, is this can be a line in the sand and a reset. Your parents want it to be a reset, and you want it to be a reset. What's in the past is in the past. Go home with the idea that it's a reset and give that a go. See what the outcome is. It might not always work. Sometimes, unfortunately, kids do go back to a certain environment, be that at home or their social groups and things like that, and they'll regress. That's unavoidable. Um, we hope with those, and that's the minority of kids that go back into that environment, which is good. But we hope with those kids, at least they've learnt lessons or something's latched on that they'll kind of reflect on
well,
later and will
yeah,
plant a
because
seed.
it's a big job. You guys have got 9 days to change a lifetime of conditioning and belief patterns.
For
So
sure. And we've got
it's
upwards of
natural
100
that there's
kids.
going to be some regression there somewhere.
Absolutely. But the amount of times where we have feedback from the parents or the kids where the child has gone home and has disassociated from negative friend groups, has approached their schooling different, and all these kind of things, it's almost in a way surprising that you can have such an impact in 9 days. And I think a big part of that is as the instructors and the guys and girls that work with the kids, obviously we all come from a similar background, so we all served in the military, thus veteran mentors, the name. Um, but we're very open in mistakes that we've made in life and challenges and difficulties that we've had with mental health, things that we've experienced, be that in the military or as a firefighter. Our childhood, a lot of the guys come from pretty negative environments when they were
Yeah,
kids,
yeah,
and that it provides a bit of I guess, a neutral playing field where it gives we can relate to the kids and they can relate to us, and they know that we're not just this perfect role model who's trying to blow smoke up their ass and say that we fucking know everything because it's not the case. We don't have all the answers to life, but we're trying to teach them that even if you don't have the answer, there's still a right and a wrong way to approach a situation, and you can learn from it afterwards.
and that's how you'll finally get the answer. It's exactly
Yeah,
what we
and
said
it
before.
takes
That
time.
we were both discussing about how we feel about having these conversations, that imposter syndrome type of thing. But it's
Yep.
pretty much we're learning as we go along, and I think that's a very positive impact. And I know I do that with my kids. Unfortunately, growing up, my family always made me believe that I was the black sheep. No one ever did anything wrong. Everyone was always right. Like all the mistakes we made, we were severely judged on, and it was a different type of pressure. With my kids, all my mistakes, I've told them, I've failed, I've done this, I wanted them to know that I've done what they've done, but I still want to be better. And we are all in it together. We're all just trying to find a way to happiness together. And I think that's the whole purpose is we'll find our happiness when we feel like we have a sense of purpose for the greater good of people.
Yeah, and that touches on a key point there, I think, is finding your purpose. And I think where I've fallen into a trap before, certainly when my time in the military ended, was I thought that would have been the biggest thing I'd ever amount to. And I went through, a pretty rough time after the military. I had a lot of depression and a lot of mental health issues, because I felt like, that was my biggest purpose in life, and that was the pinnacle, and everything was downhill from there. And that was really difficult to kind of grapple with. But what that taught me was almost, not to get too deep here, but the meaning of life isn't necessarily a single outcome. It's continual development and progression. And that could be anything from changing careers or developing in a career, developing into personal relationships, developing your understanding of anything, I guess, in life. It's that continual progression where you find fulfillment and reward in life. And the second that you lose that, that's where I feel like people can struggle a lot with mental health.
Yeah, mate, you just amalgamated everything. So before we go, if any parent wants to know more about these camps and stuff like that, or even anybody that wants to reach out to you and have any questions, how can they reach you?
So if they just Google or search on pretty much any social media platform, veteran mentors, so military veteran, that word, veteran mentors, Google that, should be the first thing that pops up. And there's heaps of information on the webpage. There's contact numbers to call, and we can talk through the programs and things like that. There's also lots of helpful links as far as different parenting strategies, behavioural understanding, and things like that. So yeah, just search veteran mentors online, and that's an easy way to find it.
Veteran mentors online.
Yep.
Fantastic, mate. I'm definitely going to get you back for another episode. There's so many stuff that I want to touch on. You've opened up so many doors that I want to
We kind of bounced around a bit there. I don't know if we got to the crux of what you wanted, but
no, mate, that's exactly what I wanted. Like every time we used to catch up for training and just chat, this is exactly how the conversations went. And I was like, I love this type of stuff. I always get something out of it, so I'm pretty sure someone in the audience definitely will.
Oh, hopefully. Fingers crossed.
No, mate, it'll be fine. Thanks heaps, mate. See you soon.
No worries. Thanks for having me. Cheers.